Hey, welcome. I'm Kristine Weber, and what I love to do is support mature yoga teachers and helping them to really express their wisdom and let it shine. This is an event that I've been planning for a while. It's called Ask Me Anything. My marketing people said, "Hey, you need to do Ask Me Anything more often." I was like, "Okay, I'll do Ask Me Anything," but Ask Me Anything always sounds a little scary to me. Like, you can ask me questions, but I hope that they are yoga related for the most part, because I don't know that I can answer anything. But anyway, so I decided, okay, I'm going to do this Ask Me Anything thing, and but mostly what I wanted to do was talk about the 5-day home practice challenge that I did like a week ago, a little more than a week ago. I'm a little congested, well, a little groggy, I guess the word is, because getting over COVID, it came to visit my family last week. And actually, we're all doing really well. I was down for about 2 days, but did a lot of yoga at that time. A lot of like rolling around on the floor yoga, and it was wonderful. Well, the yoga was wonderful. I won't say the COVID was so wonderful, but I'm, fingers crossed, like I've been feeling really better and better for the past 2 days. So it was I have so much more empathy for folks that really have struggled with that had COVID when it was much worse. And I have so much more empathy now because it was hard, even though I had like the mild version. So anyway, that's why I'm sounding a little groggy. I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for taking the time to join me. I think I'll be on for however long it takes to get through the questions. I have a list of questions here because a bunch of people emailed me stuff, so I'm going to be reading these. And if you're here, if you're watching live, I would invite you to go ahead and leave a question in the comments and I will read them. I see a bunch of people are coming on now. Somebody just wrote, "Hang in there." I have to put my glasses on to read it because it's on Instagram. It's really small. Hang on. It was just hang on. It was a message from Instagram. It's not a message from anybody else. Anyway, if you have a comment or a question, just go ahead and leave it right now because I'll get to these questions and I have to like look at my computer and my phone at the same time. But yeah, I'll do that. I have to look at these questions to read. So before we get started, the first thing I want to mention is that my weekly membership group is called the Subtle Yoga Resilience Society. That's a way you can study with me every day if you want to. But you can certainly study with me live once a week. We do once a week live stream classes, and there's 4 new classes every month. Plus, if you join, you get the whole library, the whole back catalog of classes, which includes more than 100 practices. I can't even believe it. So many. Plus, we have 4 of my 5-day challenges. So there's 20 classes that are just 30 minutes. And they cover a wide variety of topics as well. But the Resilience Society is really very, very, very broad. I love to teach about subtle practices. That's sort of who I am, subtle yoga. I mean, I love to teach subtle practices. I love to teach about mudras. I love to teach pranayama. I love to teach meditation. And subtle movements of the body, which if anybody has watched Andrew Huberman last week talk about the science of stretching, he talked about micro stretching and small movements making a big difference. It's just extraordinary how neuroscience is catching up with yoga, I think. So, that's the stuff that I love to teach, but I also teach some really practical, not that everything isn't practical, but I mean like more kind of, I guess you could say, the basics of yoga, like how to keep your knees healthy and your hips healthy and low back strength. This group is not just for yoga teachers. And a lot of people ask me that because I've been training yoga teachers for almost 20 years. And it's not just for yoga teachers, but a lot of yoga teachers tend to come. I really conceptualize it as a self-care thing. So you can find out more about that in the description. You just go to the link there, Subtle Yoga Resilience Society, and you can find out more about it. And we're having a sale until June 30th. Okay, so I see a bunch of people are coming on, so I'm going to get to the questions very soon here. If you have a question, this is a great time to put it in the comments. I'll probably talk a little bit more about the Subtle Yoga Resilience Society and, just why I think it's valuable, why I think it's something that you might enjoy. Some people have said to me, I really don't like doing yoga online. I'd much rather be in person. I hear you, and I do teach a little bit in person right now. I'm only training at the Mountain Area Health Education Center where I work with healthcare professionals, largely mental health professionals, but lots of other healthcare professionals attend my trainings there. And you know, I love teaching yoga. I love teaching there. And what I found when I got to the online platform, which was back in 2018, that it was just a way to reach people that live in different parts of the world more easily. And so I really enjoy the format. And if you are like, oh, I'm always on computer all the time and I want to like do yoga on time. What lots of people tell me that they really love about the Resilience Society is that I guess perhaps it's because I've been teaching for such a long time that I don't really have to show you how to do anything. I can describe it and you can sort of just listen and follow along. You don't have to watch a video, right? You can do it with, and that's what I want people to have, that internal interoceptive experience, because that's where I think the real juice of yoga lies, is learning how to tune into yourself and really having that internal experience. And that's not even just like my opinion, it's also the neuroscience that this is how we start to make changes in the nervous system through this inner awareness. We start to increase map differentiation in the brain, which is super important for things like chronic pain and chronic illnesses. We start to improve the function of the insular cortex, which are these two little subcortical islands. You kind of have to move your cortex aside to see them. And the hemispheres that have so much to do with integrating internal experience and emotions and external stimuli, and how that then lends itself to deeper understandings of yourself, who you are, the meaning and purpose of your life, and also contributes massively to better health outcomes. So that's one barrier that I'd like to just get rid of. And because some people say like, oh, I don't have time, or I don't. Well, if you had time to do 30 minutes of practice and maybe you only did it once, or maybe did all of those 5 practices, then I would suggest that you definitely have time. My practices in the Resilience Society are not all really long. I actually accounted for the fact that people often don't have time for a full hour class. So we do have 2 classes a month that are 1 hour, although the first one also has an optional little mini workshop where I'm talking about something relevant. And then we have 2 classes a month that are about 35 to 45 minutes. I try and keep them like under 40 minutes, but they're shorter, so they're much more accessible. And then, of course, we have the backlog of the library of everything else in it. So, there's more than 100 classes in there right now. So anyway, that's a little bit about the Resilience Society. I wanted to tell you about it before we kind of got rocking here with questions. So since I see a bunch of people are here, welcome. It's really nice to have you here. I'm just going to grab my computer and put my glasses on and see what's coming up for questions. If you're here, feel free to just type in a question. I'm happy to answer. Okay, Lynn wrote, can you explain a little more about the orienting practice we did with the arm circles? How does this help the brain? Okay, orienting practice with the arm circles. I'm not exactly sure which one that was, Lynn, but I know it might have been the one where we had our arms out to the side and we were doing, I think that might be the one you were talking about, and I had you like looking around. So orienting is a function of what's called the deep brain, which is the brain stem. And so the deep brain is really interesting. It kind of is this interest, the brain stem or deep brain, and it's midbrain. So midbrain is this interesting place in the brain which kind of connects the forebrain, the which includes the cerebrum, the cerebral cortices, as well as the limbic structures. So a lot of times people think limbic brain is not the same thing as the forebrain, but it's actually part of the cerebrum. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting too technical here, but the you can just think about like my conscious brain, which is the forebrain, right? It is where I'm kind of, where the consciousness and where the thought takes place, right? And then the brain stem is where your body's doing its thing. So like, let's say I'm just standing here and like an elephant walks in the room, whatever, like something, my cat jumps at me. My body's going to do that really fast without me really thinking about it. Thank God, because your thinking process is too slow to keep you safe, right? So you step onto the street and you quickly jump back when the car is coming by to save yourself. It's a survival thing, right? So, okay, so to get to the question about orienting, the thing about orienting is that we want to activate that deep brain, right? So we want to activate it and tell it everything's okay. The elephant's not charging, or my cat, and the car is not coming by, so that you can damp down that hypervigilant response, that survival response that is often looking out for trouble. That's the orienting feature. And it's good. Like we need to have that feature, right? So you can think about yourself like out on the savannah and you're looking you're looking side to side for the danger. And that's what the orienting response is. So when I have people do stuff where we're looking around the room and letting the eyes scan as the body's moving, keeping the eyes open, looking at stuff, what's far, what's close, that is activating the orienting response. And the orienting response is then going to go, oh, I'm looking out over the savannah. Oh, it's not the savannah, the yoga space. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's that evolutionary part that's like, I'm looking out over the space and I see that there's nothing threatening. So I can go into more of a parasympathetic response, which is what we want in terms of healing, in terms of regeneration, in terms of creativity. Like you have to get to that place of stillness to be able to do whatever you want to do in your life, whether it's heal or regenerate or be creative, like it's important. So I love orienting response practices, and I'll do them with things like twists, or when we're lying on the back, I'll, let the head turn side to side. So much more is happening than just I'm stretching my neck. And that's what I think is so fascinating about yoga practices when we start to really explore the depth of the neuroscientific benefits of these practices. It goes way beyond like, oh, my neck is more stretched now. So thanks. That's a great question, Lynn. I hope that was helpful. And if you want to, follow up on that, feel free. Okay, I'm going to keep reading questions here. So Joe wrote, loving being able to watch you live from Melbourne, Australia. Oh, I love Melbourne. That's where my brother-in-law and my niece live. And my mother-in-law lived there until she passed away. I love Melbourne. It's like one of my favorite cities in the world. Inspired to do more yoga whilst I'm sick. Oh, I hope you feel better soon, Joe. Let's see. Lynn wrote, where would we find out more about Andrew Huberman, who you mentioned? Andrew Huberman is like my one of my favorite guys who's on YouTube. So you can find, he does the Huberman Lab podcast. I'm actually going to be, I'm working on a blog right now because Huberman just did a 2-hour podcast on stretching. And, he's not a yoga specialist, obviously. He's not a yoga, he's not an expert in yoga. He's an expert in neuroscience, just like I'm not an expert in neuroscience. I'm an expert in yoga. So I do listen to him pretty regularly. And I just find him really like kind of friendly. He's a little bit redundant, cause, I guess because he's a lecturer. So I don't know, maybe I'm redundant. I don't know, but he'll repeat himself a lot, but I kind of like it. It's a good way of learning. So please check him out. And I'll be putting out a blog. Please look for my blog because I'm going to be putting out a blog in a couple of days. Maybe it might come out tomorrow. It depends on how I feel. About his last podcast that I watched on stretching. Okay, hi there, Bonnie from Pennsylvania. Nice that you're here. Let's see. Lynn wrote, oops, let's see. Sorry about that. Lynn wrote, no, it's the one where we made a figure eight and then twist and then bend the knees. Oh yeah, okay. I remember. One of the Lynn was just writing back because we're going back to that orienting thing. One of the practices I did in the challenge was where we did, like, took the arms up. I think that's when you're talking about, and then we went down and came up the other way. And it's the same thing though. It's the same principle of everything I was just talking about with orienting, just letting the head move around and seeing everything that's around you. Okay, so let's see. Life is beautiful. Hi. Wrote, how does yoga help for people with Parkinson's? That's I would say that is a, I don't want to make any sort of definitive claims. I want to start with that because I do think yoga is super helpful for many disease processes, including Parkinson's. And just as an anecdote, I had a very dear friend who had Parkinson's. He died of Parkinson's maybe 10 years ago. It was a while ago. But one of the things he did while he was struggling with it is he went to India and he did panchakarma for 3 weeks and had incredible results in terms of, uh, I wouldn't say that he had complications from the Parkinson's, and that's finally what he succumbed to. But he did have a lot of benefits from doing those Ayurvedic treatments. So Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. I think when you have a disease process, it's really helpful to consult a practitioner, right? So, of course, licensed healthcare practitioners, and then utilizing the integrative health practitioners as well, who are, who know what they're doing, because that's the thing, and you do have to be careful. It can be a Wild West kind of situation. So, you know, some people find tremendous support for Parkinson's, and I have worked with folks with Parkinson's too. So one of the things is, like, folks tend to get overheated, and so that, or the nerves get overheated. So having some cooling practices can be helpful. I know people I've worked with Parkinson's have benefited a lot from balance poses, working with balance poses to increase strength and proprioception. I would say that the single most important aspect of yoga that sort of contributes to the holistic treatment of any chronic condition, chronic neurologic conditions like Parkinson's, but other chronic conditions, I would say the single most important feature is the capacity to help people to access the parasympathetic response, because as I said earlier, that is the key in helping people to heal. So, Parkinson's it's complicated, it's degenerative, it requires very good care, and yoga can be helpful in many specific ways that go beyond just parasympathetic activation. But the parasympathetic activation is huge because that's where people can start to access some healing, for any chronic illness. So I hope that's helpful. It's, of course, much more complicated. You have to go deeper into that and in deeper areas of study. Okay, I'm going to read a couple more questions here. Let's see. Oh, I think that's all we have. If you have a question, feel free to leave it. I see that there's quite a few people on live. So feel free to go ahead and write a question. I'm going to start reading some of the questions that came in earlier. Somebody asked me, how do I get better about my daily practice? So it was a longer question than that, but that was the gist of it. And this person was talking about how she really struggles because just feeling busy all the time and so much pressure. And I think that's really common, by the way. And I feel that. I think lots of people feel that. So how do you get better about your daily practice? I would suggest that you think about your daily practice the way you think about brushing your teeth or washing your face or any kind of, like, the hygiene things you do. Because when you link a habit to a habit that you already have established, it makes the habit it reinforces the habit, makes it easier to continue that habit. So, like, my habit is I get up in the morning and I clean my teeth and use the toilet, and often I take a quick shower. And then I know, like, that's my thing. Then I go right to the mat. Like, that's my habit. So when you hook those habits together, that's how you create a better habit. So that's one way to create a daily practice that I think is really important. But that's sort of just mechanical. I think the even more important part is to find a practice that you feel passionate about, that you really feel like you love. That's what's really important, I think. Is you're like, I just can't wait to get there because I know how good that's going to feel. And I think what happens for a lot of people is they go, oh, I've got this, I want to do yoga. And so that means I need to do, 20 sun salutations, like where that idea came from. I know where it came from, but when you kind of, when you kind of peel that back and you go like, why did we get this idea in the West that yoga means I need to do a bunch of sun salutations? Like, it's so unfortunately confined to one way of thinking. It's such a narrow perspective. For me, sometimes my practice, like since I had COVID this week, for me, my practice looked like come to my mat, lie on my back, start to move my hips a little bit, move my legs a little bit, shift my arms at different places so I can feel where my breathing, I could be supporting my breathing better. Like for me, my practice looked very different this week than it did last week. And I knew when I was coming to my practice, I was going to feel really good. I was going to have this feeling of like peace in my body and feeling of openness and a feeling of lightness and feelings of like my worries starting to dissipate. That's the practice that I feel passionate about. If someone tells me my practice needs to look like X, Y, or Z, be it sun salutations, always have a down dog in it, trying to achieve some kind of a difficult pose, and that's important for me. Like, I'm just run the other way from that because it is so not what I need in terms of what nurtures me and what makes me feel whole. So if yoga starts to look like another thing you have to check off on your to-do list, like going to the gym, then I would suggest you look for a different kind of practice, and you look for a practice that makes you feel inspired and like you just can't wait to do it. That's the kind of practice that easily becomes a habit. So I hope that's helpful in thinking about your own and thinking about what your practice could look like. And if you struggle with getting to the mat, a lot of that has to do, I think, with the practice not being the right fit for what you need in that moment. I have nothing against, and I don't mind the idea of pushing yourself at all if that's what's indicated, right? If that's what's indicated. So there has to be a sense of like, oh, there's something sluggish and I need to move some energy. And that's the practice. So I have nothing against it. The problem is most of the time for many people in this highly overstressed, highly overstimulated, highly hyper aroused in terms of the nervous system culture, most people don't need that. Most people need something much more nurturing that helps to counter the effects of the lifestyle. Yeah. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. The next question I have here, and by the way, if you're leaving questions, I'm going to get to them. Don't worry. The next question I have here is, I prefer not to do yoga online. How can I still study with you? So if you don't want to do yoga online, I do teach at the Mountain Area Health Education Center here in Asheville. Anybody can join those programs as long as you get clearance from the director, which is me. And so you can look that up online, Mountain Area Health Education Center in Asheville, North Carolina. That's one place you can study with me in person. And if you really want, if you're in Scotland or Australia or something and you'd like to study with me, then I hope that from those 5-day challenge, go ahead and look at those videos because they're going to be up until I think Saturday. I hope that what you get is that I've worked really hard to be able to guide people without them having to watch me do the asana. So, or the pranayama or the mudra. Like I work really hard on getting the language right. So I hope that you feel like you can just turn on the audio on your phone, leave it somewhere and go lie down and just listen. Um, and then follow from that, from those cues. So I hope that that is one way you could study with me if you're not in Asheville, North Carolina. The next question is, why is what you do called subtle yoga and not gentle yoga? I love that question. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, it's a good one. So you could call what I do gentle yoga if you wanted to, but the reason I do not call it gentle yoga is because sometimes it's not gentle. It depends on what we're trying to do. And I am very capable of kicking your asana. Like I know how to do that. I know how to push the postures and the nervous system in a way that's healthy and nurturing and sustainable. What I don't like to do is teach practices that can contribute to long-term injuries, chronic pain, chronic conditions. And one of the statistics I heard is that 50% of the people who start doing yoga quit because they get injured. Um, and that's not good. It's not good for anyone. And I can't tell you how many people I've met and I've taught over the years who say, like, I couldn't do that kind of other kind of yoga because I got hurt all the time doing it and it just wasn't the right thing for me. So that's why I wanted to distinguish between gentle yoga and subtle yoga. Subtle means you're tuning into the subtleties of the practice. And sometimes you're working hard, but you're still subtle about the way you're working hard. So I hope that's helpful in thinking about it. I also am very interested in subtle energies and prana, maya, kosha, as well as the chakra system. So I teach a lot about that. Okay, I'm still looking here because let me see if there's some more questions. Here we go. Margaret. Hi, Margaret. I love that you bring elements of qigong into your classes. Is your study of qigong ongoing? Where and with whom do you study? So I studied qigong many years ago. I studied it a little bit in Japan when I was living there, but much more so when I was living in the Bay Area in California. And I studied with a lovely teacher whose name was Brian O'Day. I do like Mimi's classes on YouTube. I'll study with her sometimes. I think her name's Mimi. Is that right? Anyway, Chris Newell will know. Chris Newell also, I would like to recommend. He's a great Qigong teacher and he's in Perth, Australia. I think he teaches online, but he teaches a ton of in-person classes, and he's part of I don't know if ton, but he teaches regular in-person classes, and he's part of the subtle yoga community, Resilient Society and community. So I've studied with numerous Qigong teachers. Brian O'Day was my first teacher back in the day in California, and then some teachers who you probably wouldn't know from Japan, and I was like, trying to follow along in Japanese, but that was fun back when I lived in Japan in the early 90s. And then since that time, like, yeah, I'll take some classes here and there. There's a couple of Qigong teachers in Asheville that I've studied with occasionally. But it's just, those practices are so perennial. I've studied them and used them over time. Oh, the other person I've studied with, I don't want to forget to mention, is Larry Camerata, who's right here in Asheville, although right now I think he's in Italy, but Larry Camerata is a great teacher. Okay, let's see. Do you have the top 5 exercise sheet to tap into the parasympathetic nervous system? I'm not exactly sure what that means. The top, I'm not exactly sure what that means, Heidi. So if you want to continue with that question, feel free to post that. Okay, so that's all the questions I'm seeing right now in the group, and I'm just going to check real quick on Instagram. I don't see any here. Okay, so I got a couple more questions to read from here, and we have a little bit more time. Let's see, the next one is, this is a great question from Nancy. She wrote, how do I learn to feel prana in my body? I love the concept and I try, but I just can't feel the subtle energy yet. Okay, so first thing to remember about prana is that there is a continuum of prana, from the extremely subtle, very difficult to feel, and then prana that is easier to feel. And I would suggest everybody, Nancy, can feel prana. Everybody can. And you have felt it, but you probably, you probably weren't quite sure what you were feeling. So the first, one of the simplest things to do is feel the nerves in your fingers, or your feet or your face, because those are the highly innervated places in your body. And nervous system energy helps us to tune into pranic energy. Some people would say that it is the same thing. Other people would say no, like the pranic energy rides on the nervous system energy, just like it rides on the breath. But feeling the peripheral nerves in the fingers, the toes, the face is a good place to start. And then starting, like from what I learned from my qigong teacher, starting to feel energy between your hands, like visualizing. You just do this with your hands for a while. Visualize, feelings of cotton candy in your hands. That kind of exercise, I think, is a great way to get started with prana. And then you start throwing it around and playing with it and putting it in your body. So those are some ways to go about it. Another way is to work with your breath. And so the prana is the subtle energy that rides on the breath. So as the breath gets quieter and quieter in meditation, you start to tune into the sensations in the breath. Also, hands on your body is another great way to work with energy. And that everybody has healing energy in your hands. You don't have to be some special enlightened being or master healer to feel the energy in your the healing energy in your hands, because we all have it. And the next time somebody puts their hand on your body, and in a kind way, that's, you're feeling the prana, you're feeling their energy. So prana is everywhere, and we should normalize it more, instead of thinking that it's just really esoteric, because yes, there are very esoteric aspects of prana, but there's also very kind of like present, daily, practical application and feelings of prana, where we exchange prana all the time. You're exchanging it in the eyes, the way you look at somebody, the way you feel the shine from their eyes. That's all prana, so we all have it. We have prana in the voice, we all have it. So it's, normalize it instead of thinking like that you're somehow not capable of feeling that. I hope that's helpful. Okay, next one is from, I don't know who wrote this question, but the question is, what's your favorite part of being a yoga teacher? I don't know. I think my favorite part of being a yoga teacher is doing yoga and sharing yoga. I just like doing yoga a lot. I've liked it for a long time. So that's one of my favorite parts. I also love, I I think I really have always loved kind of just being on my own, in terms of like not having the 9 to 5 job thing. I made a lot of sacrifices to do that in my life, like, in terms of like not having the income for many, many years. I was like, no, I'm going to be a yoga teacher. And it was hard for a really long time. Although, I mean, I don't know. It's I think you can go both ways, I should say, because I do have plenty of friends and plenty of students who have like regular jobs and then they teach yoga too, and they love it. And that's one of the reasons I started training mental health professionals and other health professionals, because that, like, you already have this profession, you already have your career, you got your health insurance, you got the vacation time and all those things. And then if you can start using yoga practices in that um, context, it's just a wonderful way to share these practices. So that was one of the reasons I started to do those trainings, because a big part of the problem, we have plenty of yoga therapy trainings, for example, in the United States, but nobody places yoga therapists. But if you want to become a physical therapist or a psychotherapist, sure, you can get a job anywhere. So that's the big problem in the United States, is we don't have the profession yet, which is one of the reasons I've done a lot of advocacy work. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but I guess my favorite part of teaching yoga is that I like doing yoga, so I like sharing it. Okay, Kate asked this question. I'm going to be seeing a woman who wants just the right kind of yoga. She asked me to teach her some somatic stretching techniques that may benefit her Zumba, pickleball, etc. Isn't that what subtle yoga is? Slow, mindful movements, or am I missing something? Yeah, so yeah, Kate, thank you. That's a fun question. I hope that subtle yoga will help anybody's pickleball and their Zumba, or whatever else they want. But you know what I hope even more is that when they start doing subtle practices like subtle yoga, whatever form it takes, my practice or other one, I hope that she starts to understand that there's this whole universe inside her that she maybe doesn't access through Zumba or pickleball that comes to her when she is able to get really quiet and notice some different things about herself. And I hope she starts to experience transformation from those practices. So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but I hope that's helpful. Okay, I'm gonna quickly check and see if anybody else has left questions online. I just put my glasses on and look, and excuse me. Um, yeah, Na said, sorry, that's the little bit of leftover COVID. Is this being recorded to access the information later? I sure hope so. Lots of good stuff by George. Okay. Um, yes. So yeah, this is being recorded. You can watch it whenever you want. Obviously, it'll stay up on my page. And Margaret said, I lived in Japan in the early 90s. Maybe I saw you there, Margaret. Um, I lived in Kamakura down by the Daibutsu, the big Buddha. Okay, Lynn asks, what practice do you recommend during a panic attack or in the throes of one? Oh, I love that question, Lynn. I'm so glad you asked it. Because right after I had my son, I had a C-section. So this was in 2004. And I had a pretty decent pregnancy. I was 38 though. But then my son's heart rate kept going down, down, down. And every time I had a contraction, and they really tried to not do the C-section, but in the end they had to. And it was fine. I feel like I had a beautiful C-section birth. And all right, anyway, the reason I'm telling you all this is because after my son was born, I had some crazy hormonal shifts that men and women do. And I had I started to have postpartum depression. But what was really weird is that I woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't breathe, and I had to run to the front door and fling the front door open and get the cool air. It was February, so it was like getting cool air on me. And it was terrifying. And I had no idea what happened to me. So I called the midwife the next day and I told her what happened. She's like, oh, honey, you had a panic attack. Um, so that was the first time I ever had a panic attack. And I had several more, and it was hormonal fluctuations. I had never had a panic attack before. It was clearly hormonal fluctuations. And then I had a few more as I entered menopause. So again, it was like a hormonal thing. So I started to do some studying and to look more deeply and really going into pranayama, the breathing practices, right? And so what worked for me and what I teach now are the quick inhales followed by quick exhales. So it might look like inhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 really fast. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in or out through your mouth. It doesn't matter. I'm not suggesting that this practice will work for everybody with panic attacks. I have worked with people and I've suggested this. And for example, I had one client. I spent a lot of time working with folks in addiction recovery as well as recovering from trauma, right? So that's one of my areas of expertise. And so I remember this one woman I was working with, and I told her, I was like, this is the thing that really helps. And she said, that will never work for me. And I said, why? And she said, because when I have a panic attack, it's like that. And I'm in the attack. Like I don't have any way of noticing that I'm going to have the panic attack. So I was like, that's interesting. And I let it go. When I saw it, the next time I saw her, we revisited it. And I said, are you sure there's nothing that indicates you're going to go into the panic attack? And she started thinking about it and she said, there might be. And I said, okay, so let's just break it down. And I'd like you to keep a journal, right? So she started writing when she was getting her panic attacks, like what happened before and how she was feeling before. And she began to be able to identify the sensations that were coming on. And then she was able to actually intervene and use the breathing practice I just showed. So the breath, again, I only showed it once. So the breath is like and you might be doing it with the mouth open. It's not Bastrika though. It's just like take several sips of breath in and then and breathe out. Um, when I started using that, and I haven't had a panic attack in a long time, by the way, but when I hit menopause, which was like probably about 5 years ago, that's when I was getting them. So I would wake up in the middle of the night and I'd be like, okay, and do my and do my little breath thing, and that it really did work for me. But as I said, like my panic attacks were hormonally based, not PTSD stuff. So people have different reasons for having panic attacks. That may not work for everybody. For some people, the pursed lip breathing is really good. Breathing out like through a straw. That seems to work. That's what the medical community teaches. For other people, like movement can be really helpful, like breath of joy. That so what the thinking the principle of practice, if you like, is where is the nervous system and can I meet it and then take it in a different direction. I want to meet the nervous system where it is. That's why you will always hear me say things like, don't tell somebody who's anxious to lie down, put their legs up the wall, or to do yoga nidra or yin yoga. Like, that's not where their nervous system is. You got to meet the nervous system. And then with lots of finesse and understanding and the nuances and the complexity of sequencing, you start taking people in other directions. So um, yeah, it's complicated, but I hope that's helpful, and that has certainly been a helpful practice for me personally. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions here. We have about 5 more minutes, so this is a good time if you have questions to post them. Thanks, y'all, for being here. It's really nice to have you. Let's see, poses to activate the parasympathetic nervous system besides child's pose. Okay, so poses to activate the parasympathetic nervous system that are not child's pose. So that question would take me about 4 days to begin to answer. And that is because everything can activate the parasympathetic nervous system in yoga in some ways if you understand how to use the practices. So sequencing is not, here is a sequence for sun salutations. We have to get out of that understanding. Or, when I first learned sequencing, it was like, oh, first you do stand salutations, and then standing poses, and then you do some back bends, and then forward bends, and then twists, and then inversions. And I was like, oh, okay, that's sequencing. When I started studying with Gary Kraftso, which was back in 2000, I think the first workshop I did with actually Mirka was in 2003, because Gary had a brain tumor at the time. So I studied with his ex-wife a little bit, and then I took some workshops with Gary in like 2007. And over the years, I've done his training and stuff. Okay, so anyway, when I started studying with Gary, that idea of sequencing just went, because that one I had just talked about, because it's so simple and not that helpful. Sequencing involves not only musculoskeletal stuff, but it also involves the mind, the nervous system, breath, and meditation, not to mention reflection on ethics. Sequencing in this is an incredibly vast topic. And as I said, it would take me about 4 days to unpack that question of how do you activate the parasympathetic nervous system besides child's pose. But there's something in that pose that should give you one little clue that I think can be helpful, which is that child's pose is a forward bend. I don't use the word forward fold. My body does not fold like a piece of paper. A more anatomically accurate is forward bend, right? So forward bends tend to lend themselves to a Lungana situation, or a Lungana effect. So Lungana is a Sanskrit word that's used in Ayurveda as well as Yoga Chikitsa, the yoga therapies, to indicate this reducing, and it often means letting go. So forward bends and twists tend towards that. But you have to understand how to sequence them, where they go. Like, I would never start somebody out by saying, okay, sit down on your mat and let's do a seated forward bend. Like the body is not ready and the nervous system is not ready typically for that, neuromuscularly as well as in terms of just the, the arousal of the nervous system, I guess you could say. So it's much more complicated than forward bends and twists, but that can give you at least a start. And as I said, it would take me about 4 days to unpack it. I certainly go much more deeply into these concepts in my online teaching. Okay, so let's see. Lee, hi Lee, how are you? Christine, sometimes you transition from seated to standing to hands and knees, etc. I'm wondering if part of the reason is to improve heart rate variability. Yes, that's a good question. And I think what you're touching on, Lee, is the idea of baroreceptors, possibly. Is that right? So, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I would like to talk about the baroreceptors if that's helpful. So you have baroreceptors in the carotid arteries, as well as the heart, and I think a few other places in the body. And their job is to monitor your blood pressure. Most people do this position that I'm in right now every day. We do this, walk around. We also sit a lot, some of us more than others, some of us more than we would like to. And then we lie down, right? So that's kind of human beings' three basic positions, or at least in this modern culture, right? And so when you go from sitting to standing, the baroreceptors have to adapt. They have to go, oh, you're standing up, and I'm going to shift blood pressure so you don't pass out. Same thing if you go from lying down to standing up. Sometimes you'll feel a little dizzy. You got to move your body, and I do like wiggle and jiggle stuff, and that will improve the baroreception so that the blood pressure is where it needs to be. Now, what is beautiful about yoga is we don't just do standing and sitting and lying down. We do all sorts of other stuff. We do lateral bends, and we'll do forward bends with a twist, and we do inversions and all. So what's beautiful about that kind of a very holistic practice is that you are challenging your baroreceptors to adapt all the time, right? And it's beautiful. It's so powerful and so helpful. Now, whether or not this baroreception translates to heart rate variability, I think there's probably something there. There's probably something to it because of the resilience stuff. But heart rate variability is typically used as a way to measure the health of the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system. Lots of people know lots of things about the vagus nerve right now because it's really trendy and important, has provided a lot of good information to better understand our social connections, because that's the ventral part of the vagus nerve, the anterior or ventral vagal, which that ventral vagal complex has a lot to do with like how well do I interact with others, do I play with others, do I feel safe and nurtured in the company of other people, all that stuff. That's ventral vagal. And then dorsal vagal has more to do with this rest and digest stuff, like, is my digestion working well? Am I processing my food? Am I taking in what I take from the environment and able to repair my body? All that stuff, very much under the level of consciousness. So heart rate variability is used to measure vagal tone, which is like, how healthy is my vagus nerve? And so the question was like, do I use this moving up and down and all that stuff? For heart rate variability, I think it probably helps, but I don't necessarily do that consciously. It's more that I'm doing it in terms of making the sequencing really good for the nervous system. So, like, before I understood good sequencing, I could not do the kind of magic of my classes that I can do now. I didn't, like, I knew a lot of fun asanas, but I didn't understand how to put them together to create either a lungana, which is that reducing effect, or a brahmana, which is that energizing effect, or a samana, which is the, kind of neutral and balanced effect. I didn't understand that. I didn't know how to do it. I think it's largely, this is like information that is not well understood in the yoga world. And I think part of that is because we have 200 hours of training. Like, what can you do in 200 hours? Most people just learn some, sequence. So anyway, I hope that's helpful, Lee, in thinking about sequencing and thinking about how helpful it is for, for the nervous system in general, as well as heart rate variability. I hope that's helpful. Okay, and I'm gonna have time for one more question, then really gotta go. Any asana with my head forward and twists always seem to calm me down. They're very calming to my mind. Yes, that's great. Jennifer wrote that. Yeah. Often, often. And here's the other thing, Jennifer, when you know how to put together the twist and the position, right? So stand, like just say twist, or it could be forward bend. So like my twist plus the position I'm in, plus what to do with the breath. Now you've got this catalytic effect that does something powerful to your nervous system, as opposed to just here's this twist and here's how you do it. And here's what you should be doing with your spine when you're in the twist, or your arm, it's a much different experience. So I really love to take the asana, then understand which position, standing, supine, seated, prone, whatever. And then what do you do with the breath? And I'm going to leave you with that there. I hope that is helpful. Please check out the Subtle Yoga Resilience Society. I've left a link. I'd love you to study with me regularly, of course. But just so you know, the 5-day home practice challenge will be up until the 26th. After that, it lives in the Subtle Yoga Resilience Society, along with all my other 5-day challenges. I've done 4 so far, so they're all over there. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time, and take good care. And I'll see you. I'm always on live on Wednesdays, like around 10:30 or 11 Eastern time. I always do little live streams, so check those out. Okay, take care. Bye.